You're listening to Secret Sonics, a podcast exploring the creative side of music production. Join us weekly for honest conversations with real-world music producers and audio professionals. Hello and welcome back to Secret Sonics. I'm your host, Ben Wallach. My guest today is Arnob Bal. Arnob is based in Mumbai and Toronto. He has produced music for a variety of artists in Canada and India. He is also the host of the podcast Mispronunciation Nation. He creates solo material under the name Family. Former guest of the show, Christian Montano, recommended I reach out to Arnob, so it's a pleasure to have him on the show. Welcome to Secret Sonics.
Hey, Ben. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, dude. It's a pleasure to have you, and we've been schmoozing for a while already, and I feel like I know you, so it's going to be great. So tell me a bit about your story. I guess you were telling me a bit of your story before we started recording, but maybe you can tell me even further back to your childhood and just how music started for you, how that evolved into production, and I guess your story with India and Canada and the whole situation.
Sure. I hope you're ready to do a lot of editing. Here we go. I started, my parents put me in piano lessons at a really young age, but it wasn't until they put me into guitar lessons when I was sort of in the 8th grade where I was really like, hey, I like this. I like this a lot. And initially I just wanted to be like a guy in a band, and I really didn't know what a record producer was, which I think is the case for a lot of people. When I was growing up, my favorite band was the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And obviously Blood Sugar Sex Magic being one of their sort of classic records, I sort of devoured that, and I sort of learned how to play that album on a lot of different instruments, drums, bass, guitar, drums, and bass. And I obsessed over that album a lot and that band a lot, and that eventually led me to the Funky Monks documentary, which is sort of the making of that record with Rick Rubin. And when I saw what Rick Rubin was doing, and I was like, oh, that's what a record producer does. I was like, oh man, that should be my career. And the word career sort of like, it was like a light bulb, like, that's what I need to do. And, how do you become Rick Rubin? Who the hell? There's no school.
There's no other Rick Rubin.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and I certainly wouldn't compare myself to him either, but he was the sort of catalyst and still sort of especially when it's outside of hip hop, Rick Rubin is sort of even though he's one of the founding seminal people.
Yeah, for sure. With the Beastie Boys and all that stuff. Yeah,
and
totally.
And in fact, I would recommend checking out his podcast with DMC to get a lowdown on how he sort of helped birth the hip hop genre in the recording form. Anyway, that's a tangent. But
that's on Broken Record, right?
Yeah, it's such a good podcast.
Yeah, I think I listened to that. Yeah,
it's very good.
Amazing.
So I was like, okay, I want to be a record producer. How do you do it? I don't know. So then after I graduated from school, I considered going to music school. But my music theory is pretty good. My sight reading has always been pretty slow, and I never sort of mustered the courage to audition because of just my poor sight reading. So, and also like I looked at all of the idols, people I looked up to, and none of them really had gone to music school. So I just did the sort of obligatory Indian diaspora thing and went to university for mathematics. I was kind of raised in a family in a circumstance where I didn't even know that there was an option outside of going to university. Like you just I didn't realize that there were people that didn't go to university after high school. So I just went blindly into university, and I ended up majoring in pure mathematics, which I love, and I'm really glad that I did that, because mathematics gave me the opportunity to just, like, I had to study for hours a day, hours and hours, and that basically meant that I was listening to lots and lots of music. So during the four years that I was in university, my CD collection just ballooned, and just across all different genres, and so that really helped. And so while I was studying, I would come back home and plug away in my little bedroom studio, making beats and messing around with different recording softwares. This is like early 2000s. So I was using softwares that people I don't think people would even recognize today. Like I was using this beat making software called Touareg. I was using a multi-tracking software called N-Track Studio. And I didn't even have an audio interface. I was like plugging directly into the line in jack of my PC.
Yeah.
That type.
Of course.
Yeah. That's how far back I go. So eventually I finished university. The line into the PC was not working out super well. And so I got Pro Tools. I got, my first little M-Box. But I was still pretty, I can play all these instruments. I have the equipment to make records at some level that I thought was decent, but I wasn't writing anything. I wasn't doing anything. And I was in Newfoundland. I'm from Newfoundland. Not much going on, as far as I was concerned anyway, over there by myself. The music scene in St. John's was actually really awesome at that time, but I was just, because I had spent all my time studying, I kind of become a little isolated. Like all my best friends were in a band and I wasn't in the band. There was no room for me as far as I could see. So I was a little uninspired. So on a whim, I just decided to travel through Europe, as many people do, on a very low budget. And traveling through Europe then led me to just move to Scotland for like about a year and a half. And I wasn't doing any music at that time. And so then when I came back from living in Scotland for a year, I resolved to move to Toronto and give it a serious go. I really credit my travels. Like while I was living in Scotland, I actually also took a detour and backpacked through India for 3 months in the middle of that stint as well. And I credit my whole like traveling in my younger days to being able to tolerate the risk and uncertainty of actually being like a freelance creative type person. Like I don't think, coming from the background, cultural background that I was coming from, I don't think I would have had those skills if I just sort of finished my math degree and moved to Toronto. I think I would have given up a lot sooner. So like traveling and just sort of living in hostels and finding random jobs in Edinburgh and just making life work sort of gave me the skills to, just be a...
That's so cool.
Yeah, like because as a producer, you are responsible for making a project happen. Like you don't have a boss. Usually, especially if you're producing a band, you kind of are the boss in a certain way. Like, they're your clients, but you're in charge. You're the architect. So those aren't skills that were really inculcated in me in the community that I had come up in. So the traveling really helped with that. So I moved to Toronto ultimately at the end of 2008. And the whole first year that I was there, I just didn't accomplish anything. I was working for an American health insurance company, and I ended up learning way more about the American healthcare system than I really
needed to.
Well, it's useful information now. Like to be able to compare that system to other parts of the world, whether it be India or Canada or Britain. But I think I was super clueless and actually quite shocked when I came to understand how that system worked. Anyway, after that first year, I had to quit that job at the health insurance company. Those guys wanted to promote me, and I was like, "There's no way." Like and this was right around the time of the financial crash, so I assumed that I would just find like a better admin job and then continue doing music, in my free time. But because of the financial crash, there was like no better admin job to be found. And so that sort of forced me to just commit to doing music, and I was like, by that time, some MCs and vocalists were coming over to my house like on a daily basis, and we were recording tracks like every day. And like in the morning, I'd be sending out resumes and getting no responses, but then these guys would be coming out over every day and we'd be just working on tracks. So after a while, I just stopped sending out resumes in the morning, and committed to just, doing as much music as I could.
Wow.
So that went on for, a couple of years, and eventually like I had to find some kind of a day job. So I started working at like Starbucks or whatever. And, around that time, my father, so my parents, I should back up a bit. So when I moved to Toronto, my parents moved back to India. India is where my parents are from, and I've always had pretty strong ties with India. My mom is like overly patriotic, so she would bring me over here a lot more frequently than a lot of other diaspora kids when I was growing up. So she decided she wanted to move back to India. And my dad didn't want to move, but she made him. And I'm an only child. So my parents are also like an extra generation older than me. Both of them were born before the partition of India. So they were both technically born into British India.
Wow.
Yeah. And the India gained independence in 1947. So that should give you an idea.
Yeah. Around the same time as Israel.
Yeah, well, there you
a
go.
year before that, yeah. Yeah.
So the thing with my parents moving back to India is that, like, my mom is from Bombay, or Mumbai, as it is known today, officially. My father had grown up in Calcutta. And my father insisted that if you're going to force me to move back to India, we're living in Calcutta, not Bombay. And my mom sort of raised me to make fun of Calcutta. But there they are. They're moving to Calcutta. So while I'm in Toronto trying to like complete my first projects and get this music production thing off the ground, and you know how hard it can be in the beginning, my father gets diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And so this creates a situation where, in the beginning I would go visit maybe once a year or in a year and a half or something like that. But then as my father's Alzheimer's started escalating, I found that I would just get like a phone call from my mom saying, you need to get over here right now. Like, I don't know how much longer he's going to be intelligible, or I don't know how much longer he's got left or whatever, or it looks like he's going to be gone in a couple of weeks. Things started really escalating.
Wow.
And this was around the same time that I was finishing up my first full-length album, And I had made, like I said, I was working with these rap artists, R&B artists, and I'd made singles and stuff that was, it was good practice. It didn't really see the light of day. Like, we released them. They're not available now. You wouldn't be able to find those tracks now. But it was like a lot of the churning and hard work that you put in just to get to the point of making your first full-length. And I was right in the middle of making that first full-length album, which is called Live from the 32nd Floor, for and with an artist by the name of Andrew Live. And so, yeah, while I'm working on that project, my father's health is deteriorating rapidly. And at one point, I go visit my parents in India, and I discover that my mom has fallen prey to this massive identity theft scam. And they had gotten access to like my parents' like last remaining Canadian bank account, and were like siphoning off money. And
boy,
yeah, like I wouldn't have discovered it unless I had shown up and identified the situation. And so I was like, wow, my dad appeared, and at this same time, my father's was entering the late stages of Alzheimer's, and my mom was no longer able to keep him in the house. But in Calcutta, there's also like no facility for like an Alzheimer's patient. At that time, there wasn't. So mom had to put him in this weird facility sort of on the outskirts of the city. It was a nice place, but it's not necessarily geared up for an Alzheimer's patient. But, in the midst of all this, my mom has fallen prey to this horrible scam. And she's in her 70s at this time. This is like 2014. So she's fallen prey to this identity theft scam. My father is in like the last year of his life in this strange facility, and I'm like on the other side of the world. What do I do? I decide on that particular trip, when I discovered the identity theft scam, I decided that I need to like move to India. I need to move to India. I need to like keep an eye on my mom, and I need to be nearby for when my father passes away. But I also can't really live in Calcutta. Like Calcutta, out of like all the major metros in India, like Bombay and Calcutta might be the two most opposite. Like Bombay is a really fast-paced, like project-oriented, entrepreneurial city. Calcutta is extremely slow place where nobody's really trying to do anything. It's changing really slowly. But Calcutta is not necessarily the type of place where I should be living, and I probably shouldn't be living with my folks either. So my mom has a place here in Bombay. So like she's already getting into all this trouble. So I realized that I got to like start managing my mom's affairs, because she's involved in all kinds of stuff. Like while my father is in this horrible condition, my mom has also like, she has this philanthropy work that she'd been doing for years. She'd adopted 2 villages one village, like both villages on the outskirts of Calcutta. One of the villages, she built a school for the disabled, and she built a community center.
Wow.